Have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 14, printed in Part A of House Report number 118-108, offered by Mr. Roy of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 495, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I thank the Speaker. Been intrigued to listening to my colleagues with their newfound respect for private business and not wanting to have regulatory interference with private business. Well, here we are talking about the REINS Act, and what we're trying to do is ensure that you can't have unelected bureaucrats making decisions that have massive economic impacts and have major impacts on the lives of the American people. With all due respect to the ranking member from Judiciary, what we're talking about is not saying you're ending what the folks in the administrative state are saying about regulations. What we're saying is that they got to come to Congress if it's going to have a major impact. They got to come demonstrate what it is they're proposing. If they've got some issue involving radiation, if they've got some issue that involves some complexities, come make the case if you're going to have a massive economic impact like $100 million. And here I'm offering an amendment that goes a little bit beyond that. Not just the economic impact, but the impact on our society, the impact on businesses to be able to function, the impact on people to be able to go out and carry out their lives. My amendment that I'm offering here, the number 14, it expands the definition of a major rule in the REINS Act to include any rule that references one of President Biden's major so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion executive orders. This means that Congress would vote up or down on any rule promulgated by the executive branch that pushes radical gender or racial ideologies, regardless of whether it's estimated to carry a fiscal or economic impact. Why? Because the American people are tired of this stuff. They're tired of seeing this radical agenda being promoted by the federal government and pressed upon the private citizens of this country. The executive orders in this amendment are meant to sow division among the American people in pursuit of radical racial and gender ideologies. For example, EO 13985, which is designed to ensure that racial equity and support for underserved communities throughout the federal government. Well, that sounds nice in a title. But the fact is, it's directed every federal agency to conduct equity assessments to determine whether new policies, regulations, or guidance documents may be necessary to advance equity in agency actions and programs. It's effectively made diversity, equity, and inclusion one of the most important factors, including at the Department of Defense. We're not focusing on making sure our Department of Defense can defeat China. We're focusing on making it a social engineering experiment wrapped in a uniform. I wonder why we're having trouble recruiting people. It's been referenced in CMS rules on health equity that flirt with forcing providers to prioritize health care based on race. There are news articles about this. It has been referenced in EPA and Department of Interior rules that advance so-called environmental justice. Executive Order 13988, preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity on sexual orientation. Again, the title sounds, oh, that must be all nice and good. Well, it led to an HHS proposed rule that could compel hospitals receiving federal funds to perform gender-affirming care, including surgeries. It has been used to justify moves by the VA to provide gender-affirming care to veterans on taxpayer dollars. Or Executive Order 14021, quote, guaranteeing an educational environment free from discrimination on the basis of sex, including sexual orientation or gender identity. Except the problem is, it's discriminating against women, which Riley Gaines all too often knows because she was forced to swim against a dude. And we all know she was forced to swim against a dude. It was referenced in the Department of Education's proposed rule to leverage Title IX to restrict schools' ability to prohibit biological males from competing in girls' sports. Ironically, the rule recognizes schools may need flexibility to issue such a restriction for, quote, fairness in competition or preventing sports-related injury. The fact is, the American people are sick and tired of politicizing our entire culture through the executive actions that are being executed by this president without check from Congress, which we don't believe would have a chance of getting through the people's house. And with that, I reserve.
The gentleman from Texas reserve. For right reason, the gentleman from New York seeks recognition.
Madam Chair, I claim the time in opposition.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Chair, the REINS Act would already frustrate the point of government by grinding the critical actions of our agencies to a halt. Why Mr. Roy, and I presume the majority generally, feels the need to also include efforts to protect some of the most vulnerable among us is beyond me. America has a long history of discrimination, and efforts to include these historically marginalized groups should be celebrated and supported, not subjected to further scrutiny by Congress just because the majority disagrees with supporting these individuals. May I remind you that we represent all the people, and amendments like this undermine our service to our constituents. And I would ask, why should we tell hospitals not to perform certain medical procedures? If gender-affirming surgery is necessary for the patient, and the doctor says it is, why shouldn't the VA hospital provide such surgery? We do not, I presume, want to say it's because we want to discriminate against transgender people, or we want to discriminate against gay or lesbian people. I hope that's not what we're saying. But that's what this amendment seems to do. So I oppose this amendment because it goes against our notions of equality and our notions of fairness. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New York reserve. Mr. Roy from Texas. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank the Speaker. If my Democratic colleagues support these executive orders so much, if they believe that these are the best things since sliced bread, that we need to have all of these orders that are turning our entire society upside down, that are redefining traditional roles in society that we understand and the difference between man and woman, if they're so excited about those policies, then why are they worried about voting on them? What's the problem? Why must they just be executed by a faceless bureaucrat at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue or in the alphabet soup of the agencies in this town? Why shouldn't this body, the People's House and the Senate, speak? That's all we're talking about in the REINS Act and these amendments. I reserve.
The gentleman from Texas
Prepared
reserve.
to close.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Prepared to close. Yield back.
Gentleman from Texas.
I yield.
The gentleman from Texas yield back. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Chair, rather. The gentleman says, why don't we legislate on some of this? We have. But I remind the gentleman that last year we passed the Respect for Marriage Act, codifying the rights of two men to marry each other or two women to marry each other because we respect freedom. The amendment does not respect freedom. The amendment, by its description, by its sponsor, would say, no, we don't want to do gender-affirming surgery. We don't want to perform surgery that people need because we disapprove of them. That is wrong. The REINS Act is a very bad act for all the reasons I've stated many times already today. I'm not going to repeat them. This amendment would make it worse because diversity, equity, and inclusion executive orders are things to be celebrated, not things to decry. I yield back.
Yields back. The question is